Hey team, and welcome. I'm your host, Carrie, creator of Mother Life, your destination for all things real talk and parenting. This is the IRL group chat, where we talk about the wild balancing act of pursuing careers and passions while also doing our best to show up for our kids. Join me every week as I sit down with some badass parents in my closet and we talk about their careers, kids, and relationships and all of the weird shit that comes up when you're trying to balance the seemingly impossible. Being of service to others, being part of something bigger than ourselves. There are so many ways to do it, and as a parent, I want so badly to make sure that my kids understand the value of helping others. Being mindful that the world doesn't in fact revolve around them, and that there is a deep sense of purpose and peace that can come with being a helper. To celebrate 4th of July and remind us what this country is really about, certainly what we want it to be about, I wanted to spend some time with someone I respect immensely, a leader who has made being of service to the United States a long, illustrious career, all alongside being a father to 3 now grown kids. Retired Colonel Jeff McCausland spent 30 years serving in the United States Army. During his military career, Jeff served in a variety of command and staff positions, both in the United States and Europe, during the Kosovo crisis and Operations Desert Shield and Storm. He taught at West Point. He led battalions. He was the dean of the U.S. Army War College. He then went on to continue to teach, to inspire others to be good, strong, admirable leaders, both through his academic appointments and as founder and CEO of Diamond 6 Leadership and Strategy. If all of that wasn't enough, he brings straightforward analysis and insights to a range of media outlets, chief among them as military consultant for CBS News, where I first met him working my first job at CBS News Radio after college, which now was a very long time ago. And despite all of those substantial credentials, he says if you really want to know about war and service, talk to his mother, his wife, the parents holding up the whole wide world for the kids whose parents are off being of service. The United States Department of Defense is the largest employer in the United States. Think about that. And while we can sit with deep discomfort about the direction of where our country is going at the moment, I certainly do, we can also recognize that there are literally millions of people who have fathers, mothers, brothers and sisters, husbands and wives working in the line of duty as an act of service to all of us. Happy 4th of July, wherever you may be celebrating this week. Enjoy this and share with a friend. If you've been trying to figure out how to get a dad in your life hooked on the pod, maybe this is the one to share. Enjoy. Thank you for being a part of my little setup. It's great to see your face.
Great to see yours. You look lovely as always.
Yeah, likewise. You look like, always like freshly shaved, got your act together. So this is, I would reckon, probably one of the more personal interviews, Jeff, that you've ever done.
Probably.
Because we're gonna start with Jeff as a kid and get to Jeff today and cover, by the way, happy belated Father's Day.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
And you're a grandfather as well, right?
Twice.
Yeah, so happy belated Grandfather's Day too. It's all the same thing. So we're going to start with little Jeff and we're going to get to today. So okay. I actually, online, you really can only find so much out about Jeff McCausland.
Good.
And we're about to blow that out of the fucking water.
Yeah, and it's probably all bad, right?
No, it's more just like it starts with your military career. Yeah. But we got to go back before then because all sorts of people decide to get into a military line of work for all sorts of different reasons. Yeah. And often that starts when you're a little kid. So Let's start. Where did you grow up?
Well, basically in West Central Illinois. My father moved around a good bit, looking from one job to another. So I was born in one town called Decatur, Illinois, which is in southeastern Illinois.
Yeah.
Then we moved to Chicago, we moved to Wisconsin. And then we basically settled in West Central Illinois in a little town called Beardstown, Illinois. From the time I was about the second grade on, that's where we lived through high school. Small farming community, about 6,000 people.
Wow.
Surrounded by soybean fields and hog lots. Yeah.
And do you have siblings?
I do. I have three brothers, one older, two younger.
Okay. So you're like you're I love birth order stuff. So you're a middle kid, but not like a
Sort
proper
of.
middle kid.
Right.
You're sort of like older slash middle together.
Right.
Which actually makes a lot of sense for you because they say middle children are the peacekeepers and the older ones are obviously the sort of like leaders keeping everyone in line. So honestly, this kind of fits you, Jeff, from what I
Okay.
know.
Maybe. Maybe.
Okay, so you're growing up in Illinois in a pretty rural community, and you said your dad was moving around a lot. Was your mom in the home taking
Yeah,
care of you
yeah.
guys?
Yeah. It was a traditional leave it to beaver kind of family. Dad went to work, mom stayed home and took care of the four kids. Yeah, that was pretty much the way it went.
And do you have a childhood favorite meal?
Oh man.
Like something that makes you nostalgic? It doesn't have to be
Oh,
classy.
nostalgic.
Like if there's
Yeah.
something that
Well,
like your mom used to make or that you guys
yeah.
used to eat
Well,
together as a
yeah,
family.
yeah. Probably it wasn't one of my favorite, but nostalgic. My mother was a very staunch Roman Catholic Irish lady, and my dad was converted. He converted to Catholicism when they got married during the war. So back in those days, of course, that meant you were subscribing to the tradition that you didn't eat meat on Fridays.
Right.
So you had these very traditional non-meatless meals. My mother would make tuna casserole or salmon croquettes, out of canned salmon, and you had that every Friday. So you knew what day of the week it was by what was sitting on the dinner table.
And when you went on to have a family of your own, did you repeat any of that stuff?
No, because fortunately, I went in the Army and we got a automatic exemption from that religious requirement by being in the Army, so I didn't have to worry about it after that. Number one, and then the Catholic Church finally woke up, looked around, and realized it was the 20th century, and decided that they didn't need to keep doing that anyway.
So no canned salmon croquettes for you.
No, that tradition died out a long time ago. Yeah.
Okay, so you're growing up in this community. It's a very Leave It to Beaver sort of existence. And what sorts of things were you gravitating toward in school or extracurricular? Were you into sports? Were you into science? What were you into?
I was a pretty good student. I ended up graduating second in my class. There were only 96 kids in the graduating class, so it wasn't exactly huge. I like sports, but unfortunately, my family was rather low income. So from the time I was, from the second grade forward, I had a job. So I worked most of the time when I was a kid. I had a paper route when I was in second grade and worked on from there, worked in grocery stores because my father was in the grocery business throughout my time in high school, which kind of got in the way of me being as involved in athletics as I would have wanted to. But I did run track, cross country, that kind of stuff. Played a lot of tennis. But yeah, there was a lot of time working in a store.
Yeah.
A lot of time working in a store. Yeah.
And where did sort of this idea that you would join the military come into your consciousness? Was that something a lot of people were doing, or where did you get the idea for it?
Well, I think a couple of things. One, my father was a veteran, and all the men in those days of his generation, because they were all the World War II generation, so they were all World War II veterans, and so they would talk about it to some degree. All my uncles were World War II veterans or Korean War veterans, for that matter, number one. Number two is you got to remember, Terry, back in those days, you had a thing called the draft.
Yeah.
So you were going in the military whether you liked it or not, and it's very difficult to make people, I mean no offense, your age, because I talk to my kids about this, understand what this was like, and that you could get this postcard in the mail, and it was a postcard that would change your whole life, okay, from the local draft board. So from the very beginning, I knew that was going to happen. And I remember thinking, well, I think I'd rather you do this under my terms rather than their terms. Number
Right.
two. Number three is my father was a hardworking guy, but he had quit school in the 8th grade to help support his family during the Great Depression. And so he only had an 8th grade education. And he was very adamant that he wanted us to graduate from high school. And he often would say, I will do more for you than my dad could do for me. But for him, that meant going to high school.
Right.
He said, if you go to anything beyond that, you go to college, that's your problem. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to do that. So And that's when I got interested in perhaps going to the military academy at West Point. It put me in the military, which I kind of thought sounded, not, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I was also adamant that I was going to get out of this small
Right.
farming town
Yeah.
surrounded by soybean fields and hog lot. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew whatever it was, I was not going to do it there.
Right.
Okay? So it was going to get me out of that, number one. Number two, I was going to have to go in the military anyway because of conscription, number two. And number three, the price of going was the right price. It was going to be free.
Right. But
And
we
get
have to, we also have to like pause for a second, because anybody can want to go to West Point, but not
Yeah.
everybody gets to go. This is a highly selective,
Right.
very difficult to get into prestigious institution. It's like saying, oh, my parents, said if I want to go to college, I have to do it on my own terms. I guess I'll go to Harvard and get a scholarship. I mean, in
Right.
terms of the difficulty to get in. So going back to, you said you were a good student in school, you were diligent, you were working.
Right.
I mean, getting into West Point is no cakewalk, from what I understand.
No, it's not. But I will have to admit, that it was less difficult then
Right.
than it is now.
Yeah.
Because it was the middle of the Vietnam War, and a lot
Right.
of guys were coming back from that. So that, and I often have said to young cadets when I met colleagues of mine now that were 50 years beyond that, we probably couldn't get into West Point now if we tried.
I don't think any of us could get into the universities we went to now.
That's fair. But I had a plan B, and my plan B was ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps, was a lot larger programs at colleges and universities. So I'd applied for an ROTC scholarship as well, and it came down to the fact that I got the ROTC scholarship to go to the University of Illinois, or I got the position at West Point, so I decided to go to West Point.
And your mom, she's home with all of you guys.
Yeah.
You're working toward this goal. How does she feel about one of her babies going off? I mean, as you said, this is a hard time
Yeah.
for all parents, because there is a big question mark about what their kids are going to do, their boys are going to do, their young men are going to do. How is she feeling about this trajectory for you think?
Well, I think she had the combination which most parents have, and I've encountered tons of parents because I taught at West Point, so I met parents of cadets, and I taught at the Naval Academy, so I met parents of midshipmen. And it's always that combination of worry and pride.
Yeah.
But my mother in particular she was one tough lady. I remember in, it must have been 1992, we got back from the Gulf War, and I was on a fellowship to the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. And my father sadly had passed away, so my mom came over to visit. And I'd been invited to go to Oxford University by a friend to give a talk to some of the students and faculty about the Gulf War, where I'd commanded a battalion. So I said to my wife, well, they're going to have a dinner for me at Oxford. How cool is this going to be? And my wife, we just had a baby, had our third child, and she said, look, I've heard you give a lot of talks, so I'll pass. Why don't you take your mom? Because she was visiting with us. So I took the mother to Oxford, of all places. And she's, from a small town in Illinois and New Jersey, to go to this, and you've been to these places in England, one of these old halls in one of the universities,
Yeah.
for a dinner and a talk. So I don't remember anything I said that night, but I remember how I introduced it, which underscores what you just asked me, and that is, I said, if you want to understand wars, you don't want to talk to me. The person you want to talk to is my mother here in the front row. She married my father in 1942. Shortly thereafter, he left as a seaman on a Liberty ship heading across the Atlantic. A few months later, she got a telegram that his ship had been torpedoed and been lost at sea. He was recovered, obviously, or I wouldn't be here to talk about all this. At about the same time, she got a second telegram that her younger brother, his plane had crashed after a bombing run over Japan, and he was the only guy who survived, though he
Wow.
was badly wounded. In 1950, her youngest brother was a Marine at Chosin Reservoir in Korea, where they were surrounded by the Chinese. He got wounded 3 times. My older brother went to Vietnam in time for the Tet Offensive, and I went to the Gulf War.
Wow.
So talk to her.
I mean, that's truly a heart attack at every turn. So I get your point about her being a tough lady, because it sounds like she wouldn't have had much of a choice in that matter.
Yeah.
You got to have nerves of steel. I obviously, now being a parent, would be very hard for me to imagine. And you obviously have kids of your own who are all doing different things. But what I think is so interesting, also, do we call you professor, colonel? What do we call you? You have so many hats.
Yeah, I prefer Jeff, actually.
Okay, fine. Good. That's the one that I'm best at calling you. But I think one of the things that is really interesting about your sort of trajectory is both your commitment to education, and I think you feel really strongly about the importance of education,
Yeah.
and your commitment to like mentorship and supporting young people. I mean, I remember we first met, for context for everyone else, when I was working on the news desk at CBS News Radio.
Yep.
And you always took interest in us young people. I was always really interested in sort of international conflict stuff. And you were always like, well, come along to this, or let me introduce you to someone, and always really generous with your resources and your time. Do you feel like some of that generosity, because not everybody's like that in positions that you have held, do you feel like some of that comes from the fact that like you didn't have those opportunities yourself when you were growing up?
Well, maybe, but there were people who helped me along the way too. And I'll tell
Right.
you, it's very kind of you to say, but I've always thought that everybody needs to, bring it forward, you know.
Right.
And every time I help somebody, I've often said to them, they say, "What can I do for you?" And I say, "You can't do anything for me. But what you got to do is you got to find that other young person who's going to come see you very soon, because pretty soon you're going to be considered a very senior person."
Right. So, okay, now we have to go back to you in college. So you're at West Point, and I know very little, actually. I know it's hard to get in, but I don't know what happens when you get there. So what sorts of things are you studying while you're there? Do you have like a, quote, major?
In those days, they have now majors. In those days, it was more of an engineering school, which has been traditional. What West Point was created back in the early 19th century to provide engineers to build canals and roads and railroads, and that's what it was all about. And I was a lousy engineering student. So you had fields of concentration. You could concentrate in things. So I concentrated in what probably would be called international affairs and history were my concentrations. I did well in those courses, did terrible in the engineering courses. But the way West Point worked in those days, and in fact, I told a student who was in my office one day, who was complaining about how hard his life was as a student. My life is so, I said, no.
Buckle up, buddy.
No, I said, no, man, your life's not hard. You're doing okay, okay? I said, let me put it this way. The first day I entered West Point, they took us into a large auditorium, so we're all seated in this big auditorium. There's one cadet who was in charge of all the summer training. He gets up on this stage, calls us all to attention. So they were standing there all at attention. And he said the following. This kind of underscores how they thought about things. Look at the person on your left. Now look at the person on your right. One of you three won't be here in 4 years.
Jesus Christ.
And my job is to get rid of you as soon as possible. That's sort of, so I said, if you think your life's hard, trust me, you're fine.
The Hunger Games, man.
Exactly.
Jeez. And so you're spending this time in class, you're spending this time, obviously there's like a physical component as well to your time there. And when you go to leave West Point, where do you go?
Yeah, so...
What's your July 1 look like?
Well, one other comment about West Point, because of the nature of the beast, you become much closer, I think, to your contemporaries and your classmates than probably any similar college institution. I mean, I have about 10 classmates of mine who live here in the area, and we meet every first Saturday of every month for breakfast.
Amazing.
Religiously. If anything happens to anyone, one of them right now, sadly, he and his wife were hit by a car. His wife sadly was killed.
Oh my God.
So we're now working to help him out to recover from that. So there's this closeness of this group of guys which hangs forever, okay, which is very important. So I left West Point, and you've been 4 years as a cadet. Now you got to learn to be an Army officer. So I volunteered to go to parachute school and the Ranger Commando course. So I go down to Fort Benning's School for Wayward Boys down in Georgia, and I spend about I don't know 3 or 4 months going through parachute school, jumping out of airplanes, and this Ranger Commando course. Which, to give you a clue, I entered this course at weighing about 6'1". I weighed about 185 pounds. And the day I entered, the course lasts 8 weeks and 2 days. I graduated, and I weighed 159 pounds.
Oh my God, bones.
Okay. Yeah. So I went through that, and then I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, because I'd selected field artillery as my branch. Fort Sill is the home of the artillery, and they put you through about an 6 or 8 month course. I've forgotten how long on field artillery. And then shipped out from there to Germany. So I was in Germany, arrived there in the spring of 1973.
And where does your wife enter the picture?
Well, I met her in Germany, but I didn't meet her for a couple of years. I met her towards the latter part of my tour, and she was working for, she was working for the German government. Under the agreements between Germany and the United States, the German government provided a certain number of civilian employees to do things in support of the Americans. So my wife, for example, worked at a transportation office, and what she did was she coordinated all the shipment of household goods for military families that were coming into Germany or when they were leaving. They would do the plane tickets for you to fly home when you departed. They would work with the Bundesbahn rail system in Germany, because periodically we go on exercises, and they'd transport all our heavy equipment to the training areas by train. They coordinate all that with the Bundesbahn. So that's what she did, and I met her there.
And by the way, I had no idea that your wife was German.
Mm-hmm.
What a fun fact.
Yeah.
And so you're there, your tour ends, and then you go where, and what happened? Does she come with you?
Oh yeah, she comes with me. We're not. That's not true. But, okay, we didn't get married. I came back, and then she came over about a year later, and we got married here.
Okay, that's what. Because it's like, okay, well, that would be. I mean, whatever. Things happened faster then, but that would have been pretty fast.
Yeah. So the Army really is, and the military in general, is probably the only corporate entity that really part of its culture is really revolves around education at all levels. So each time you kind of move up to a new level, they send you off to a school to educate you for that level. So I go to the basic courses to learn how to be a lieutenant, and then I go off and do lieutenant things. And then after I finish that, I come back and I'm a captain. And I go back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to learn how to be a captain and command a company and be what they call a fire support officer and a battalion staff officer. So I went back to Fort Sill, Oklahoma a second time to go through this advanced course, and I got married I got married shortly after that. And then I went from Fort Sill to Fort Stewart, Georgia. By the way, if you're not familiar with Fort Stewart, Georgia, you have to understand that Fort Stewart, Georgia, particularly in those days, had recently been reopened after World War II, is the original Camp Swampy in Beetle Bailey. They got Mort Walker, the guy who did Beetle Bailey. Camp Swampy was Fort Stewart. That's where he was served during World War II. Okay. It's one big swamp. So I went to Fort Stewart, Georgia, outside of Savannah, for a couple of years and commanded the battery, and that's when we got married and started, our particular lives together.
What was it? Total culture shock? I mean, obviously she had spent a lot of time around Americans in her time doing her job, but it's one thing to do that, and there's another thing to end up here, married to some guy you thought was cute. I mean, it's a real big change, Jeff.
Oh yeah, no, she's put up with my wife has put up with unbelievable stuff. She's on her way to sainthood. There's no two ways about it. It was an enormous cult, and probably I didn't appreciate it at the time, and probably appreciate it more now than I did then, honestly. Yeah. But I mean, not only she spoke fluent German or English. I mean, my wife has really an ability of languages, so very few people can detect when they talk to her that she's not from New Jersey or someplace, for God's sake. But shortly after she comes over, we get married, then I go off on a month-long exercise someplace. leave her by herself. Yeah, you know.
I mean, I cannot
Yeah.
imagine. So at this time, were you thinking about, how old were you when you got married?
I was 28.
20. So at this time, are you thinking you want to have kids, you want to have a family?
Yeah, we hadn't kind of decided that just yet. We're just getting used to being married.
Fair.
And I always tell everybody, you know, before you have a kid, you know, get a dog. If you can pick
Yes.
between a dog, you're on your way. Okay.
Yes, I agree so much. Oh my God, I totally agree.
Yeah. So, but then we had a great experience, I think, which was very valuable for us, and that is, I was thinking about getting out of the Army. I fulfilled my obligation, and it had not been easy. These were difficult times. This was right after the Vietnam War, and it was pretty hard. Okay.
Hard in terms of like the
Yeah.
society's views toward being in the military.
Yeah, and then that generates internal dynamics. So I mean,
Yeah.
in the early 1970s, you know, there were big racial issues inside the Army. Huge. I mean, I was in a battalion that had a black gang, a Latino gang, and a white redneck gang. Okay. Drugs and alcohol abuse were pretty pervasive amongst the enlisted guys, and so you had a lot of trouble, and you weren't getting paid that much, so you know it was very difficult on a lot of the families, which put pressure on the soldier, you know,
Yeah.
to boot. So I was thinking about getting out of the Army and doing something else, and so I'm kind of, you know, putting feelers out and talking to folks. I remember a guy telling me he was a headhunter, going to get me a great job, and I was going to be making all kinds of money and in a big supervisor role. And I finally said to him, I said, okay, man, doing what, for who, where? Let's skip all the hyperbole.
Yeah.
Doing
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
for who, where? And all the jobs were in the Deep South, number one. They were working, I can still remember this day, Frito-Lay potato chips, Scott toilet paper, and Pampers.
Ooh, sexy. This is
Yeah,
sexy stuff, man.
I was fired up about that. And you were basically going to be a supervisor of an assembly line. They figured you had some basic leadership skills, so we're going to give you, you know, 25 or 30 people on an assembly line, and you're going to keep this assembly line moving. Okay, that didn't excite me too much. Okay,
No.
at the same time, out of the blue, the Army came along and offered me the chance to go back to grad school and get a master's degree, and then go back to West Point and teach for 3 years on the faculty. So, okay, let's see, Scott toilet paper or go to grad school. let's.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the way it works is for every year they put you in education, then you owe them 2 more years of service. So that's nothing's for free.
Sure.
So we decided to do that, and I got accepted at the Fletcher School at Tufts University in Boston. Off to Boston we go, the two of us, and had really a wonderful 2 years, just the two of us living in Boston in a tiny little apartment. My wife got a job working in the office of the president at Harvard University. She was doing an admin job there. So because we had no kids, you know, we had plenty of, we weren't rich, but you know, we were
You're
better
comfortable,
off
yeah.
better off than any other grad student I was with by far, and so we could have a pretty good time. And that was an enjoyable 2 years. And then we went off to West Point, and we got to West Point. That's when we decided that we'd start a family, and my daughter was born about a year after we got to West Point.
Now, for you, did you have any ideas? I'm going to preface this by saying I don't think I did, but did you have any ideas about like what kind of parent you wanted to be, or any thoughts on any of that, or was it just we'll figure it out as we go?
And I think I'm probably more in the latter category.
Yeah,
you know.
same.
I mean, I do think that I wanted, you know, well, 2 things that come to mind. One is because of our particular family being multicultural. My wife and I had agreed we wanted our kids to grow up having a good understanding of the 2 cultures they came from.
Yeah.
And we did pretty well in that. My daughter is totally fluent in German. She could get off the plane tomorrow in Germany. And
Amazing.
she'd be totally at home. My 2 sons, pretty much, though their fluency is probably not as good as daughters. So that was one objective. And then the second objective, which I got to tell you, is something I found is true, and I tell people this all the time. This may sound odd to you, but when I talk to people about immigration, and people in the United States, get all upset about immigration, and it's a topic, celeb, I tell them, I say, look here, I've been in some really terrible places. I've been in Iraq multiple times, Afghanistan, Bosnia during that war, Kosovo at the end of that war, Salvador. So, I've been in more of my share of pretty awful places. And what I've discovered is what people want, and I think what most of these illegal immigrants want. I don't think they're all drug dealers and rapists. There's a few there, but the majority of them want one thing. They want their kid to have a better chance than they did. Not necessarily a better life, a better chance at a better life. That's the one thing that motivates human beings. So as a parent, I wanted my kids to have a better chance or better opportunities than I had.
I love that. And also it's just kind of a continuation of your dad's objective for you, right? He wanted to do one better, and you did one better than his expectations. And so I imagine that just continues to grow with each generation.
Yeah, sure. It should, in my opinion.
Yeah, same. I agree. My husband always says that being a parent is you're paying it forward, to your point, of the childhood that you got. And if you didn't like your childhood, it's a do-over, it's a mulligan, you get to have another chance. But just the general idea that like energy was invested in you in some way, even if it wasn't good energy, and being a parent is about just investing that energy forward again.
Yeah, I buy that.
So I really like that. Now, obviously, as someone in the military at the time, you're at West Point, so you're not having to travel a lot when you start having kids.
Nope.
Was there a point in your time when your kids were little that you were traveling a lot?
Yeah, we went from West Point to another course at Fort Leavenworth for a year with just my one daughter, Tanya. And then we went back to Germany, and I was a battalion executive officer, the deputy commander of the battalion.
And how many people are in a battalion?
Oh, about 750.
That's a lot.
And that's where our second son was born. And of course, because those days that was the middle of the Cold War, so probably a good third of my time I was deployed. I mean, I wasn't deployed at huge distances, but we'd go up to the training areas or be up on the border between us and the Warsaw Pact. So I was gone out of the home for probably a third of the time. And then, of course, the penultimate example of that was when I returned. There were a couple assignments farther down the pike, and came back to the same battalion as the battalion commander in 1990, skipping ahead about 6 years. That's when we got deployed from there to Saudi Arabia for Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And so that's when I really kind of, my wife and I didn't plan things well, and so I departed to go to Saudi Arabia in December of 1990. And my lovely wife had two small kids, and she's pregnant with our third kid.
Oh my God.
And also because she's the battalion commander's wife, there was some expectation that she's going to look after these other, 300 or 400 wives and kids that are all left behind in Germany.
Holy shit. Wait, I never considered that. I never considered that piece of the social architecture of the military, that there's also this almost like being a first lady, like that she has her own responsibility. Wow, I completely never considered that.
So she's doing things like going to meetings of the wives, organized meetings by the community of wives. How do we notify someone when we get a report that their husband's been killed in action? How do we handle notifications of those things? And what kind of systems we put in place to take care of kids if that happens? And so she's doing all that while I was downrange.
Well, that is extremely heavy and goes back to your first point about you want to know about war. Ask my mom, the next generation of that. But also she was kind of perfectly trained, it sounds like, for some of this stuff, given her professional experience prior, like the logistics, some of that stuff. She was probably prepared better than some.
Better than some, but there's no rule book for this one. You know,
I truly can't fathom. So was your son born? Were you there when your son was born?
I got back about 6 weeks before he was born. I didn't think
Wow.
I would, but it worked out that I did. Yeah.
Oh my God. And how was it for you to be away from your kids? Was it just like everybody's doing it, this is what it is? Or was it occupying your thoughts?
Well, as a battalion commander in combat, you're pretty
Lock the
busy.
fuck in.
So there wasn't a whole lot of time, but there were times when yeah, I would think about it, and it would really depress the hell out of you, frankly. I mean, your biggest, um, as a commander, you have personal and professional concerns. Your personal concern for me was I might not ever see my family again. That was that weighed a lot on me. But then at the same time, you got this professional concern of, I might make a mistake, and a whole bunch of my guys get killed.
Yeah.
And
Huge.
that weighs on you a lot too.
What sorts of, I mean, I know you were sort of like born into leadership in the sense that it suits you very well. It's something that you gravitate towards. I know that you have to, I know you have said in the past, like, leaders aren't born, they're made, and there's a lot
Right.
of skill to that. But I do think some people gravitate toward that calling. I mean, I'm sure anybody could be a leader, but maybe anybody wouldn't want to be.
Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's very fair. I mean, I think that you have to have a desire to do that. And I tell people, candidly, you can't run any organization without pissing somebody off.
Yeah.
And if you want to be really loved, if you really, and there's nothing wrong with being popular. If you want to be popular, then you don't want to be in a leadership role. That's just the wrong place to be.
Yeah.
Okay. We used to have a saying in Washington, if you want a friend, buy a dog. Okay. Because you just can't do that. I mean, you become close to people, but particularly in the military, especially because of the nature of what can happen. But you always have to keep in mind, and I was talking to somebody about this just the other day, you can never be really friends in a true sense while we're still serving and I'm in command. I can never be truly your friend.
Yeah.
Because if I'm truly your friend, then I can't hold you accountable if you really screw something up. And I got to be able to do that for the benefit of the
Yeah.
entire organization.
So it's got to be like the day-to-day a little lonely then, no?
Oh, very much so.
So what's
Very much so.
what's the mental game like there? Like what sorts of things when you're away from your family, you're in a pretty scary situation, you're responsible for a lot of people's lives. What's the mental game like? And the reason why I ask is because I do think that there are always tools that we can take from one situation and apply to another. And some days, like especially parenting young kids, is dark as hell.
Yeah.
And like, let's see, is there anything we can take from it? What sorts of things were you doing to keep yourself focused and going? I don't imagine you're sitting on the floor doing Om Shanti Shanti, breathing and
No,
meditating.
you ain't got time for that. I mean, again, the other thing you got to remember is that wars in combat are short periods of very, very intense activity, followed by long periods of mind-numbing boredom.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to deal with that. I think the one thing you got to do is you got to keep everybody else moving. I used to say, busy hands are happy hands. Okay,
Right.
so I would figure out all things and work with my NCOs and officers to keep everybody busy and occupied. Okay, for example, this is silly, but so we are in Iraq after the ceasefire's in effect, and we're sitting there in the desert swatting flies, and everybody's miserable because here we are. So I grabbed this one lieutenant. And I said, "Come here." I said, "I got a job for you like you cannot imagine." He said, "What's that, sir?" I said, "You you are going to be the first head of organized baseball in Iraq. You're going to be the first Iraqi commissioner of baseball." He said, "Sir, what?" He said, "Sir, what the hell are you talking about?" I said, "Well, look here. Here's an engineer platoon, and you're going to take this engineer platoon and the survey team, and you are going to build me a baseball field, okay? You know the movie,
Field of Dreams?
Yeah. If you build it, they will come. I said, we're going to call it, if you build it, we can leave.
So good.
So you're going to build this baseball field, and we are going to have a battalion-wide baseball tournament, and every battery's going to have a team, and we really hype this thing, okay? And the whole reason was to keep everybody thinking about something other than how, pardon my French, fucking miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. Genius.
Yeah,
So
that's what we
good.
did.
That's such a good one. I do find, and again, to just draw the parallel back to early parenting, I do find when I just make an activity next to my kids, like they want to play with me, but I don't want to pretend like I'm Batman for the next hour. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, I'm going to build Batman's cave out of magnetiles or whatever it is. I'm so much more calm than if I'm just like spending the whole time doing the thing I don't want to do. So there is
Right.
there's a parallel
Right.
there.
That's
And
right.
often it's when I'm like coloring or building something with them that I'm the most calm. So I totally buy the idle. The
Yeah.
happy hands are not idle, or however you
Busy
say it.
hands or happy hands.
Busy hands or happy hands. Okay, so at what point, so your kids are sort of growing up all over. When do you all move back to the U.S.?
We moved back to the U.S. Well, we went from West Point to the Pentagon. I was in the Pentagon for a short while, and then we went back to Germany. Then en route I got selected for this fellowship, the IISS. So we spent a year in England, and then we came back to the United States. So it actually drove, and you'll be interested, in the parenting side of that. It actually drove a lot of decisions. In other words, when we moved to England, we decided we were going to live close to an American base. We could have lived anywhere, so as long as I could get to the office I had downtown London. We decided we were going to live near an American military base because we were only going to be there for a year. My daughter had been in a German school. She'd been in a German school for 3 years, in which she was the only American kid, which actually turned out very well, I thought, because, back to parenting, where we were when we deployed, all the American kids went to an American school, right? You're saying, so what? Of course they did. Well, when everybody deploys, suddenly you've got a building, an elementary school full of kids, and every kid's dad is gone. Every kid's dad has deployed to a combat zone. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, or the middle school like that. Imagine, you
Yeah.
got all these middle school kids, and every one of them's their dad is gone. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas my daughter, she was in a German school, and my wife talked to the principal and the teachers, and she was the only kid in the school that dad is gone.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, not to be an armchair psychologist, I thought that
More stable.
It put her in a more stable position. Right?
Yeah. Well, and if it just prevents like this collective sense of dread.
Yeah.
Because it's
Anxiety.
not like it's not, yeah, exactly. It's not like dad went to New York for a couple of days
Right.
and is like eating at Nobu. He went to war.
Yeah,
It's
right,
a little bit of a
right.
different thing for
Right.
everybody who's left behind.
Right. And
So having her near the American base, what was the benefit?
the idea
of that?
was we were only going to be there for a year, so we wanted to transition her from being in a European school system into back what was sort of a traditional American school system.
Wow.
And that worked out very nicely. But it was kind of funny for my son, her younger brother. He had been in a German school as well, kindergarten, so he could speak good German. But we decided, for a host of reasons, to put him in basically the British equivalent of first grade. They call it infant school, but it's really for first grade. So he goes off to the Brit school, which means honest to God, he has to wear a white shirt
Sure.
and a tie and the school sweater, and the official trousers, and the whole enchilada. Funnily enough, he actually develops a Brit accent. He could do an unbelievably great Brit accent, which was hilarious. Okay.
I mean, that's an extremely impressionable age.
And then we come back to the United States, and we enroll my son in a regular, school, elementary school. And then in like October, after a couple of months, you have the meet the teacher thing, where you go to the school after a couple of months. So we go to this school, and I'm talking to this teacher, and she's showing, the work and all this kind of good stuff, and Nick's doing fine. That's great. And then she says, but I got to tell you something. She said, he did the weirdest thing I have ever seen. And I'm thinking, oh God, sweet Jesus. what did the kid do, you know? And she said, well, she said, I asked a class kind of a rhetorical question, and I could see that Nick was thinking about it. And so I said, well, Nick, what do you think? And he looked at me and he said, I know the answer in German. And I said, well, seems to me one of two possibilities. Either A, he didn't have a clue and he was he was good on his feet, or B, he knew the answer in German. And so either way, I don't see how we lose here. This is all good.
This is so funny. So, okay, so when you guys moved back after that stint in Germany, or in the UK, were you then here to stay, or did you go back out again?
We came back here. Went to the Army War College. I was there for, this is like 1993, I guess. Yeah, I was there for 3 years, and then we went back to Germany again for a 1-year assignment in a place called Garmisch-Partenkirchen, which is a beautiful alpine ski area. There's
Sounds
an
nice.
institute there. Yeah, it was really nice. All the kids learned how to ski real well. But we were only there for a year, and then we came back to the War College, and I became the dean of the War College. So I
No
finished
big
out.
deal.
Finished out. Of the last 9 years of service, 8 of them were at the War College and 1 year in Germany.
And then how did you get into the broadcast piece of, like, you know, some people will recognize your name, your voice from broadcasting.
That's funny, and you know a lot of these characters, so
I do.
It makes it doubly funny. So I had finished my time in the Army at the War College, and then at the urging of a friend of mine who was a Marine, I applied for this position as a chaired professor at the United States Naval Academy, civilian position in the leadership department. And then I got that, so down to leadership department I go, and that is in January of 03. Yeah. No, January of 02. Okay. Anyway, so of course we invaded Iraq in March of 03. So in February of 2003, I'm in my office one day, minding my own business. My phone rings, and it's a guy at CBS News, and he says, "Hey, you know, we think there's going to be a war, you know, and we're looking for people to be commentators." And I remember saying to this guy, I was kind of rude. I said, "Oh man, you're a flipping genius. You think there's going to be a war? What's the indicators? Could it be that 200,000 Americans in Kuwait and that fleet and gee willikers? You know, you're on it, man."
Charming, Jeff.
So we talked for a while, and then I said, he said to me, I said, "Well, I was doing some things in New York. I said, well, I've got to be in New York next week. If you want, I'll come by the studio and we can actually meet in person." You know, he said, "Well, that'd be great." So up to New York I go, and I meet the people on the TV side, and that seemed to go well. And I did, during the invasion, I did some TV work. And then I went over to the radio side. I met with you knew Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
I met Charlotte and Connie, you know, and sit there and had about a half an hour conversation with Charlotte. And then I said, "Okay, well, I got to go, you know, let me know what you think. See you later." And left. Didn't think anything more about it. And then they contacted me and everything went as you well know. So then we go through the invasion of 03. And then back in New York, why I was there, I'm not quite sure, but I'm sitting in the office with Connie Lloyd, who you know is the producer. And we're watching George W. Bush, you know, land his airplane on the aircraft carrier. And we all know George is an Air Force pilot, was actually, you know, piloting that airplane onto an aircraft carrier, something he had never done in his entire life, but we know that he did it. But be that as it may. And then we got the mission accomplished speech and all that stuff. And so I'm sitting there watching all this, and she looks at me and she says, "What do you think's going to happen?" I said, "Tell you the truth, I think this is going to be really ugly for a good long while." Never realizing how truly ugly it would be.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she goes, "You know, I think you're right." You know, she said, "We're getting ready to fire everybody we brought in for this war because it's now supposedly over, but we're going to keep you."
Got to have one military pundit in the back pocket.
Yeah.
And the rest is, and now how many years in are you?
22.
Amazing. Now, okay, so I know, so I guess I should say in parallel to this, you also started Diamond Six, which is
Yep.
your leadership institute. Do we call it an institute?
It's more. We do an executive leadership workshop. That's the
Executive
company.
leadership.
Yeah.
And again, drawing parallels from your significant experience in leadership in the military and bringing that out into the real world. I know your daughter is just announced as the CEO.
Yeah. And by the way, I want you and her to talk at some point.
I would love to talk to her.
Okay.
I would
I'll
love
put
it.
you guys. Okay.
So we now have her taking over as the CEO, and she's obviously seen the importance of this work and wants to continue to support sort of getting these lessons out into the world.
Yep.
And I'll put a link to Diamond Six in the show notes so people can
Cool.
check it out.
Cool.
And then you've got one son who followed your footsteps into news, right?
Yep.
He's at NBC, is that right?
No, he was initially at NBC and
Where is he now?
as a writer. In fact, we had kind of the reverse thing. He actually deployed to Ukraine for about 6 months as a reporter, which was really
Wow.
very difficult for me.
That is extremely interesting. Was it difficult because he wasn't there in a military capacity, or just
No.
the standard he's in a dangerous place and
Right.
I'm not there to protect him?
Right. And I'm the only one that fully understands how dangerous it really is.
Yeah. Wow. So he's now gone down this news path, and what
Yeah, so
we're missing
he
a
went
kid.
from he went from NBC as a journalist and writer to BBC as an editor. He was a BBC in New York as an editor, and recently he's taken on a new position, and he is the news editor for the Council on Foreign Relations in New York.
Amazing. And then what about the third?
A work in progress.
Nice. We love a work in progress.
All right.
Jeff, this has been so interesting. I know you have to go. I want to just ask one last question,
Anything.
which is the U.S. military is one of the largest employers of Americans and thus has a huge impact on families around the country. What would you want people to know? This is our 4th of July episode. What would you want people to know or keep in their thoughts about military families and sort of what they go through, especially in those early years of parenting? While not military families ourselves, how can we be supporting military families in the day-to-day if they're in our communities? What are some things you think would be useful?
Well, that's a great question. I think that people need to realize what you realized, and that is, the service person is the person who joins, man or woman. The family gets pulled along for the ride, okay? And the spouse in particular is the one then that when you deploy, and a substantial portion of the 2.6 million people in the Department of Defense are deployed. If you're in the Navy, you're going to be deployed probably 6 months out of every 18 to 2 years if you're on a ship. And so it's the spouse back home who's left with the burden. So anything that people can do to assist, particularly these days, about 20% of the force is women. So you do have a number of stay-at-home dads these days, which was never the case certainly when I was a young officer, but you have more of those today. But still, the 80% are probably, the spouses are probably women. And so a lot of them are young women, oftentimes married to young enlisted guys. Frankly, paychecks aren't that huge, so their life is pretty difficult. So anything people can do to alleviate that burden or keep that burden in mind, they should think about it, number one. And that even goes beyond the basics. But the other part is military spouses, and again, more often women than men, but still there are male spouses, suffer from the fact that they have a difficult time with their own personal career progression, be they whatever they are, a nurse, a teacher, whatever they are, because their career pattern is always being disrupted because my wife is being deployed somewhere else, and I got to go.
That's such a good point.
So anything that people who are employers can do is in taking these folks on would be of enormous import. And then the last thing is that, there's still a lot of young people that, two things. Thing number one is, and it may sound counterintuitive, a lot of people serve in the military and then leave, and that's the way it is and the way it should be, because we have a natural, mathematical model. We don't want everybody to stay because there's fewer sergeants and there's fewer than there are privates, etc. So there's an awful lot of talent that is leaving the military, having served, and many of them, because of the wars we've been involved in, have gone through difficult circumstances. And I hope people don't forget that in terms of thinking about them for either college scholarships or thinking about them for employment. I would suggest to them that these young men and women are A, enormously talented, B, by their experiences, probably much more mature than their contemporaries. They have
Yeah.
a lot of skills in terms of basic leadership, teamwork, etc., that any employer ought to gravitate towards. So reaching out to even any of the veteran organizations in your community and using that as a conduit to identify fine young people for your enterprise, whatever that might be, would be a good idea. And then last but not least, I think the one thing on a 4th of July that people ought to think of, and I always tell young kids this, is I always say, look, I recommend to any young person coming out of college or coming out of whatever educational level they finish at, to be part of something that's bigger than they are. That doesn't mean the military. And the military isn't for everybody. I guarantee it's not an easy life. It wasn't an easy life. It was a rewarding life, but it wasn't an easy life. But I think that those are very rich experiences that you will draw from, be that in the military, being that working for a nonprofit, being working in a religious vocation or something like that. Whatever it is, be part of something that's bigger than you are. And you will learn enormously from that that'll benefit you then as you go into a more traditional career pattern. But frankly, we all know as you age, that becomes more complicated because you take on families and partners and whatever.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, the best time to do it is right then when you're, just finished up college and you got the time and the freedom to go off and do that. Because Lord knows we need that kind of talent. And right now it's really tough. I mean, consider the fact, if you lined up 10, 18-year-olds right now, men and women together, and you talk to them, only 3 of them could join the military if they wanted to. Because of education levels, because of disabilities, because they're overweight, because they've used drugs, because they're going to run into the law. So the military, in terms of maintaining what I think is really important, defense of the nation, has to draw from an ever-decreasing pool of people. And as a consequence, I would hope that people would think about that, and though it's challenging, perhaps talk to their kids about that as a possibility, at least for some period of time.
Well, I like to end on some fatherly advice, so that was great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Have a great rest of the day, and I'm excited for people to hear this one.
Yep, I'm excited as well.
Thanks, Jeff.
Team, I need your help. If you love it here, please like and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe to the Substack for full access to this episode's show notes and join the discussion. And of course, follow me on Instagram at mutha.life for a daily look at all things mother. Thanks for listening. Be sure to tune in next week for another Chat in the Closet. This podcast was produced by Mother Life, music by Ronan Landa. See you next time.